In the restaurant last night where I took my wife over to the Greek place, and it's closed on Sundays. I respect that, absolutely. So I had to swap Bibles because I can't see the words on my pulpit Bible, so I'm going to grab this large print one from the phone. If you would, turn in your Bibles to 2 Kings, chapter number 18. 2 Kings, chapter number 18. We're going to do a little bit of a survey this morning. I'm hoping I can even read my notes. It's pretty bad, right? I mentioned in last night at the prayer meeting, I find myself a little disheartened by the condition of America's morality today when it comes to living in sin. There are so many couples in our day that are living in sin. So many young people who aren't marrying. Some of them in their 40s, especially in New York, we're seeing this, and I find myself stirred by it. I'm bothered by it. I understand many of these young men do not want to marry. Young women are putting up with it, of course. They are giving the benefits of marriage to the men without requiring the commitment, the legal commitment in the ring. And of course, many young men will, of course, take advantage of that. One of the things I'm finding is we talk to people and I read some of the comments on many of the threads when it deals with these various issues, why some of these men are not marrying. It boils down to they're afraid. These young men who are now in their 30s and 40s were raised in homes that became broken, and these young men in their 20s are also following the same pattern, and I find that there are a couple causes, and one of the chief causes is these men saw their fathers in these broken homes raped financially. And so many of them are living in bitterness because they saw their fathers lose half of all their stuff and then work, and see their paycheck taken. Not too long ago, a few years ago, I saw a man who made very good money here in the city. $80,000+ a year on paper. The taxes are killing him because he had to file as an individual because he had been divorced and he had just one child. And this one child was already an adult, well into his 20s, but because he was in college, the court made that father continue to pay child support, and he had been paying child support since that child was 3 when his wife left him, married another man, and he continued to pay child support and alimony. The courts had abused him. And because he was in such a high tax bracket as a single, he watched over 40% right off the top of his check disappear because he had to file as a single man with no dependents. That knocked his pay down to $50,000 a year. But of that $50,000, almost $25,000 had been given in child support and alimony. Child support and alimony. They took the other half of what he had been given. The man had $25,000, made on paper $80,000 a year, but then was trying to live on $25,000, and his rent was something like $1,400 a month, which came out to quite a big chunk of change. $16,000, $18,000 of that $25,000 a year was going directly to his rent. Another $2,000 or $3,000 were given just to his utilities. Now you're talking $20,000 a year of his income just to his rent and utilities, and he still, on the last $5,000, had to buy food and clothes. And though he drove professionally for a living, he could not afford a car or car insurance, and he made $80,000 a year. And there was not enough left over for him to buy food and to own a car, though he drove professionally. And this young man, seeing his father go through this for all those years, not just a few years, it was a decade after decade. He'd seen his father in this condition for over 2 decades. And a young man growing up and going through college and looking to get his first job, and he's got girlfriends who allow him to live in a marriage-like setting without a commitment of marriage. They are able to live in sin without the commitment of marriage, and she gives him everything marriage gives him without requiring the commitment and taking the risk of losing half of everything he has, losing half his pension, losing half of his accumulated wealth. And they look at that, these young men, why would they want to marry today if they can get all that they want out of a marriage without having to put in danger that much of their income? Even so, these men are still craving to have children, and there are men who are in their 30s and 40s who have never been married and yet had girlfriend after girlfriend coming from broken homes, and they're getting all that they want in that relationship without the commitment, financial commitment, and they've delayed having children. And they want children, but then they get to the place where they feel, well, maybe I'm too old, and they become insecure. You say, this is sin. The Bible says, be fruitful and multiply. It says, the marriage bed is honorable because marriage is honorable and the marriage bed should be undefiled. Marriage is honorable in all things. And yet men are living like they're married, considering themselves to be married, and they are hedging for financial reasons. It seems to be really the only thing that they're but these kids are being raised, and they are finding, sociologically, they are finding that with the internet, these young men are becoming more insular in a virtual reality, and they are finding inappropriate physical release through their virtual reality, and they are living in an environment of solid, continuous entertainment. When they are not entertained to death by comedy and action, they are finding their release through the stimulation that they can find easily on the internet. And they are becoming insular, and it is becoming a problem across Europe. It has become a problem in Asia. The Chinese government is trying to fight it. The Japanese government is trying to fight it. I suppose other governments are trying to fight it. It has become a huge problem in America, where men are increasingly uninterested in even putting themselves out there at risk of emotional harm because they can get not enough and all they need, but they can get good enough. They can get good enough from the virtual world. You say, well, why is that anybody's business? Well, of course it's the church's business because it's about sin. But it is a societal problem because the consequence of this is no marriage, no children, and no future for a culture. And it is a problem because Christians, Baptists, have been caught into this sin. Baptist men are falling into the sin, and yea, Baptist women are given into it as well. He said, well, Pastor, why are you talking about fathers on Mother's Day? These men are being raised by mothers. The work that I see in various places, it just bothers me. When I am visiting in a home and I see home after home after home in a broken community which I work in, and on the wall there are pictures of mothers and kids, but no fathers. And the mothers are raising, now the third generation in some of these homes, the young men who will themselves not become fathers. They will not become leaders. They become donors. It is important that we have mothers that have a change of heart. That women get a hold of biblical principle, that get perspective and make some decisions in life, that they are not going to just give the marriage life away without requiring something of the men. We have to decide that we're going to have mothers who realize that fathers are important. This famous actress for Mother's Day is getting a lot of attention because she had a child at 47 years old. But the child was through a surrogate and perhaps an anonymous father. And she's so lovely, and this child is so lovely, and she can be a loving mother, and all the comments, she's going to be a good mother. You don't know nothing about her, whether she's going to be a good mother or not. Because you like her on TV means she's going to be a good mother? Because you're impressed with some of her acting work? Is it a good mother that starts off with the premise that the male child she decided to pay to have to another woman who surrogated for her? Does it make her a good mother to begin life by denying that child a relationship with any father? Well, he'll have a father figure. Look, father figures aren't real in this modern day. They're barely there. You know what makes a good father figure? When a woman chooses a good father for her children. We don't have arranged marriages. Women choose a good father, a good man. Because a good man makes a good father figure. It is imperative that we are careful to make good choices. Because a child, a son, raised without a father will never truly be able to grip onto these things. He will struggle with it. And eventually, by faith, he may become a father, but it will take a lot out of him to actively pursue in his life trying to be a good father and trying to be what he needs to be. Because he'll lack that image, that example to follow himself. That means he will have to literally blaze a trail in his own marriage and in his own relationship with his children. Sometimes wondering, am I doing the right thing? Because he doesn't know how it's going to come out. That's tough. When every decision you make as a father, you have to wonder, am I doing the right thing? Because I don't know how this reaction, how this leadership will turn out. And if your mother denies you the right to have a father, does that make you a good mother? Looks more to me like she finally is going to get a little boy, a little man that she can control and make love her the way that she wants to be loved. That doesn't sound like good mothering. But I'll give him all the love he needs. You'll not give him all the love he needs. You'll give him all the love you can give. But if you want to be a good mother, choose a good father. Look here in 2 Kings chapter number 18. And this is important because your mothering skills will go a lot to raise your children. Conditions in the family can be awkward based on what life throws at you and what life puts you in. But I want to look at a series of kings in the book of 2 Kings chapter number 18. And what I find amazing about this is in the Bible, in the book of Kings, when it speaks about the kings of Judah, over and over and over again, in this patriarchal society, we see the king, and then we get an either honorable or dishonorable mention of his mother. And I think that's important to understand because here in our book of Kings, these kings often had many wives and many responsibilities and rarely spent the time as fathers to do what they needed to do with their children. Often dying early, absentee, and it was left up to the mothers to raise these new kings. Quite often, things did not work out well, but there are a couple that came out well. It says in 2 Kings chapter number 18, verse number 1, and now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that's the king in the north, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. So during the king of Hosea in the north, that king, King Hezekiah, became king. Verse number 2 says he was 25 years old. He was 25 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. It's a good long reign. 29 years is a long reign. His mother's name also was Abi. Maybe Abby, right? The daughter of Zechariah. Well, who is this? This is interesting because it mentions his mother. His mother's name is Abi, which oddly enough means my father. So his mother's name meant my father. I don't think that's something weird in this sense, but was a respectful thing to reference to who her father was. Well, it tells us who her father was. It was Zechariah. And Zechariah means Jehovah remembers. But this woman is memorialized, coming from a pretty decent family, from Zechariah's family, and she made some changes because her husband was not necessarily a good man. Her husband had been quite a mess. Her husband had been king in Israel and had brought the place down, but she had a positive influence in Hezekiah's life. And Hezekiah became a good man. He became a good king. He took over at a time where judgment would be brought to Israel and to Judah. In his time, the Assyrian army would come down and would crush the 10 tribes of Israel because God had prophesied he had had enough of their rebellion. He had had enough of the wickedness. And he says, you know what? If you're going to live like this, I'm not going to have anything of you at all. And he decided that the work of his hands had not come out well, and he let the Assyrian army come in, and the Assyrian army decimated the 10 tribes in northern Israel. The Assyrian army continued down into Judah looking to conquer, and in Judah, the Assyrian army wiped out city after city after city. Took down their strongholds, all their false gods, all their false religion, and just crumbled. The party was over. And Hezekiah, though he became king, he did not have a good, strong grip over the culture and religion and politics of southern Judah, but he was doing the best he could. And he hunkered down, and during this period of time, a prophet, Isaiah, judged Israel in the south. He judged Judah. And he came to Hezekiah when the Assyrian army had basically knocked out all the other places, and they were shut in together there in Jerusalem when the Assyrian army and Sennacherib had come and had blasphemed and says, who is this God Yahweh who's going to deliver you? He hasn't delivered Israel. He hasn't delivered the rest of Judah. Don't even think he's going to deliver you. And he blasphemed, and he had a mighty army outside. City after city after city, walled cities, cities as great or greater than Jerusalem itself had crumbled under his army as, just like Pac-Man, he moved through and just gobbled up everything that stood in his way. And here his final conquest, the great Jerusalem, stood in his way, but Hezekiah was a man of God. Even though many in his city were still very pagan, he called them to repentance. He called them to call on God. He called them to look for God. He went to the temple himself. He prayed for his people. He bowed his heart. He repented for himself, and he repented for his own people. Somebody put some character in that man. And if you read the Bible, you know it wasn't his father. It had to be his mother. Mother Abby did it. His Mother Abby helped to show him the way, perhaps the stories that she had told him of a time past, the stories that had related to the Scripture. Perhaps she was an individual given to prayer, and many nights he had seen his own mother in prayer, faithful in her religious duties. Perhaps he had seen her at her feet stand up to what was wrong, suffer consequences for it. Perhaps he had seen even his own father trash her, talk bad about her, misuse her, malign her, and put her aside. Who knows? She raised a pretty good kid in spite of it. And I say this because I tell you, it is possible to be abandoned by a father, to have a wicked man for a father, but a mother who is attached to God and tries and does her best and prays and puts as much character in her son. It is possible to raise a good boy. But I want to let you know this morning, we should not make that the rule, because when you see the example of 500 years of kings here in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, you see 500 years of kings in this, and it makes mention of their mother. You find out that in this culture where usually the father is absent and the mother is raising them because he's got many women, you find out it's the exception, not the rule, that the kid comes out okay. Most of these guys where their fathers neglect them grow up to be rebellious. They don't have the guidance, they don't have the patience, they don't have discipline. They become wicked men. The rule is they don't come out well. That's why it's important to have a good father. It's important to have a woman choose a good father. In this day and age, often the woman had little to no choice on who her husband is. But you and I in our day, we can choose. We can choose. Choose wisely. Choose a good man. Because he will affect the tone of the home. He will make a profound impact on the lives of your sons and on your daughters. The relationship of your children to their father will often dictate their relationship with their heavenly Father. Because what they experience in dad is what they'll experience, what they expect to experience with God. Although God is good, even when mom and dads aren't. You can overcome. It can be done. Hezekiah shows that on rare occasions when they begin to make the right decisions and they have the right influences in their life, and mom really tries, that he does grow up to do, as it says in verse 3, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. According or after the manner of David, his father did, but you can thank his mom. Because his own dad was a bad example. Go on into chapter number 20, and we find his sickness, his pleading. God delivers him in chapter 18 and 19 from the Assyrians. Saves Jerusalem, the only city that really survives the onslaught. The Assyrian army leaves. It takes most of Israel with it. Takes a lot of the riches, but the riches of the temple, the riches of the king are there, even though his population has been decimated. He now has a place to go forward from, and his power is then asserted, but he gets sick in chapter number 20. It looks like he's going to die, and he turns to God, and God is kind to him. Extends his life 15 years. During that period of time, a son was born. Look at chapter number 21. God extends Hezekiah's life 15 years, but 3 years into Hezekiah's extension, this kid named Manasseh was born. Chapter 21, verse number 1, Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 55 years. 55 years this man was king. And this is the longest serving king of Judah or Israel. 55 years he is king. And what does he do? Well, he does that which is evil in the sight of the Lord. In fact, he does more evil than even the pagans around him. He adopts everything the pagans have. His dad was a good guy, but his dad died when he was 12. So what was the big influence on his life? And his mother was Hephzibah. Hephzibah is a nice name. It means my delight is in her. It's also used as a nickname by one of the prophets for Jerusalem. My delight is in her. Hephzibah. Now, perhaps her dad named her that. I don't know. Perhaps this was the nickname of his father. Hezekiah could have found her delightful, but she might have had some character flaws. How would you like to be this woman? You notice how many of us don't name our child Hephzibah? Because she raised the wickedest king that had ever lived in Israel. This guy went off the rails. He built up again the high places, verse 3, which Hezekiah his father destroyed. He reared up the altars for Baal. He made a grove and did as Ahab, the king of Israel, and worshipped all the hosts of heaven. He had a pantheon. He was a liberal in that he accepted all religions and he brought them into his kingdom. And he worshipped all their gods, and he tried to make all the gods and all the religions in his kingdom equal. And he served each and every one of them as if they were equal to the God of his father, that narrow-minded old bigot Hezekiah, that old-fashioned Hezekiah. This kid was given to sensuality because all those religions are sensual religions, and allowed him to express himself in the most gory of ways. It allowed him to be pleased with all the fleshly attributes that he could. The kid was in full rebellion and anger, and it says he built an altar to all the hosts of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. It means right there at the temple itself, in the first temple, he built altars to all these other gods in the very face of Yahweh. He defiled the Holy of Holies. This was a kid that was looking for pleasure and prosperity. Well, how do you know? Verse number 6 said he even made his own son to pass through the fire and observe times. Pass through the fire means he gave his own son in child sacrifice to Molech, to the Baals of that region. Those were the gods of prosperity. He looked for prosperity so much so he led the people and gave his own son to pass through the fire. A live human sacrifice. Not unlike the motives for abortion today. Looking for prosperity, killing off your own children so that you can be prosperous and not be bothered to be a mother. It's too early. I'm not ready for it. I don't want a child that's going to screw up my life and stop my partying. So we'll sacrifice him to the gods of prosperity. I tell you, it may feel like fire when that tender little skin receives that saline solution. It burns them inside the womb and they bleed out and die in their mother. There's a reason why the abortionist numbs the mom before they kill that baby. So the mom can't feel that child kicking and fighting death as it struggles for life. But it's for prosperity, so she can be rich. So she can do well in life, so she can finish college, so she can have a good job and a good career and say, yes, I am woman, hear me roar. I'll sacrifice my children and I will have all that I want. And he made his son to pass through the fire and observed times and used enchantments. It means he embraced astrology. He lived by his horoscope. Brought in professional astrologers and people who tell your future. You know, I'm seeing somebody, Jeff, Jake, somebody in your life, Jimmy, Sal, that's right, Sal. They bring in these frauds to use enchantments. And he dealt with familiar spirits. They went to channel spirits and wizards. He brought much wickedness. He wrought much wickedness in the sight, or literally in the face of God. God is standing there watching him and he says, I'm going to do it anyway, and I don't care what you think. Shaking his fist at his father's God. As far away from his father's God as he could go. His father's God saved that kingdom that he was now governing. He would have been nothing more than a nobody living in northern Iraq, in eastern Syria, if his father hadn't prayed to that God that brought deliverance from Sennacherib. If the angel of the Lord hadn't turned them out. If God had not delivered Jerusalem, this boy would have been raised in a foreign country. In fact, he would have never been born at all. Because his father would have died either there in Jerusalem or as a eunuch in a foreign country. And this child would have never been born. And how does he repay God? With full-on rebellion, running as far away from his God as he could. Well, how did he become like that? You can bet it was the influence of his mother, Hephzibah. We have no idea where she came from, what she was doing. We don't know If she was even a Jew or religious or what. But it's very possible she was a woman who was filled with bitterness and put that into her son. Maybe not happy with her relationship with her husband because she had to share her husband with so many other women, and she may or may not have been the chief of them. She might have had a mean streak. You never know. But she taught this boy something. And you can guarantee that whatever bitterness and anger and that's got him all bent out of shape and running from God as far as he could, and doing the most outrageous things to say, hey, look at me, and acting out, daring God to do something about it. I can almost promise you it was from his mom's smart aleck comments to him all along the way. Whatever it was his mother had did, whatever she was like, maybe she was a drunk because she couldn't get her way, just drinking away her days. And you never know, maybe she was angry and as a result of that, beat her son. Maybe even worse, maybe she treated the boy like he could do absolutely no wrong and never disciplined him, which is probably the case. If she was neglected by her husband and she needed somebody to love, she had that one child and she could have put all that love into that boy. And thinking that if I disciplined him, he won't love me. If I straighten him out, he won't love me. And listen, if you don't discipline him, he cannot love you. He will have no respect for you whatsoever. You have to bring discipline into the life of that child. He's got to know where these boundaries are because he will go to the absolute extreme. He will push the envelope when he was young. He will push it farther and farther and farther to see how much he can get away with. And if he doesn't respect his mother, he will never respect women. And you see as he goes on here, it is clear he had no respect for his mother. And a lot of times, in cases like that, it's because his mother, looking for love, thinking that she's going to find it by putting all her love into this boy inappropriately instead of her husband, refused to discipline him, refused to correct him, turned him into a self-entitled, self-absorbed monster. 55 years God put up with this man. It shows the grace of God. He put up with this wickedness, he put up with this man, but the die was cast. He had decided that was it. Manasseh killed Isaiah. The Bible tells us how he was put into the hollow log and sawed him in half, mocking the prophet of God that had saved Israel. He made graven images. He done all these things to provoke. And the wickedness is just enumerated all the way through. Manasseh was a wicked man. But he had a son, and his son's name was Amon. In chapter number 21, verse number 19, we see Amon becomes king. And as Amon was 20 and 2 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 2 years in Jerusalem. God had had enough of that because why? Verse 20 tells us he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord as his father Manasseh. So one of the shorter of the kings had followed the longest of the kings, but God had had enough of Amon. Who was his mother? His mother was Meshullemeth, the daughter of Haruz of Jokbah. And his mother's name, which is hard to pronounce, literally just means friend. Can you imagine your mom's name being friend? And the city that she was from was a city called Pleasantness. It was a fortified city in the south. And it tells us that her dad was somebody in that city. He was a famous individual. His name was Haruz. Haruz just means one who is split, or in some cases zealous, but meaning cleaved, as you would dig out a trench around the city. And it's kind of a weird way to think, but you got to do some mental gymnastics to kind of understand what the meaning of the name is. And but his daughter just meant friend, and she was one of Manasseh's wives. And her son, Amon, 22 years old, became king, and God had had enough of it. He worshipped those idols, forsook the Lord, verse 22, and God had enough, said, well, that's it. And the servants of Amon, the servants in the household, they conspired against them because they had had enough of their father. His father had obviously, in all their wickedness, and all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of his kingdom, the way to continue that is to rule in fear. And this man obviously ruled in fear. Everybody was afraid, and they had had enough of living that way, and they conspired, assassinated him. They assassinated him as king, and then the people came together and assassinated the conspirators, but not because they didn't have enough, because they had had enough too. And the Bible tells us that they put in a new king, and they put in this young man. His name was Josiah. Verse 24, they made Josiah king in his stead. Now, chapter number 22, verse number 1 says Josiah was 8 years old. Not 12 like Manasseh, but this guy was 8 years old when he began to reign, and reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem. That was good. And his mother's name was Jedidah. Not like Jedediah, but Jedidah, the daughter of Adiah of Boscath. Now, this speaks well because they did what was right, verse number 2, in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the ways of not of Manasseh, his physical father, but David. He did not turn to the right or to the left. He decided in his heart that he was going to do right. At 8 years old, something was put into his heart, and it brought temporary revival to Israel. It stayed the hand of judgment. You know what it was? It was his mother's influence. Just as Hezekiah, Josiah, his grandson, through a series of events, becomes king in Israel. And it was because his mother had a positive influence in his life. His mother's name means beloved, or one that is beloved. So this is obviously another wife of King Manasseh. Many of those relationships were political relationships. And we see that his first wife, who had Amnon, the 22-year-old, that was a political relationship. And the second one was a political relationship. These were two prominent individuals of major cities in the south in Judah, from countries that had been destroyed. Boscath had been a Philistine city that Joshua had conquered, and after Joshua, it had become a great city. Boscath was a city near the Philistines. There was a contrast between them and the pagans, and whoever this Adiah, who means Jehovah has adorned himself, had an influence in his life. So with all the gods around them, it was pretty clear that this man had been somebody in this little city in the south and had prominence, but he himself had named himself Jehovah has adorned himself, meaning Jehovah is wonderful and splendorous, that this is a great God, and he had an influence on his daughter. And his daughter, which meant beloved, must have been beloved to him. But she had been instilled with some things. She had been instilled with principles. She had been instilled with faith. And as a result, she relayed that faith as a good mother to Josiah. And at 8 years old, this young tender boy had determined in his heart that there were choices to be made, and he was not going to go the direction his father had gone. But he made a choice that his mom's way was right, his grandfather's way was right. He decided, he saw both of it. He saw the wickedness, he saw his brother, and just even in that young age, he decided he was going to go the way of the God of his mother. He had seen that pain. God had chosen him for a reason. He did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. He did some tremendous things. He reigned 31 years, and that tells us he died before he was 40 years of age. Seems pretty young for those of us who were above 40. There was revival and there was good. Chapter 22, verses 5 through 9 tell us about construction. Amen. He hired carpenters. I like that. And he began constructing the temple again. He began building back up things that were wrong in the temple. And they were faithful. Chapter 23, verses 1 through 16 tells us how he's doing demolition. He begins demolishing all the pagan things that had polluted the city. And he begins tearing those things down. There was revival. When you have revival, that means you've got to do some things that are hard. That didn't always make him popular because there were a lot of people still love that fleshly religion. But he did the right thing, and he did some things that were painful. He gathered up the priests of Baal and he had them beheaded. He started funding the training of priests for work at the temple, and he admired the prophets and gave them an environment where they could preach and bring revival. He found a copy of the scripture and he had the priests read it to not just the people, he had them read it to the elders and say, you guys are off track. You don't know what the Constitution is. You don't know what the Bible is. He was a guy that was getting back to the basics. He got back to the hardcore principles, and there's something to be said there. In the New Testament, in the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 5, verse number 7, the Apostle Paul speaks all the wickedness, and he says, purge out the old leaven that you may be a new lump. Famous verse, because we read it in our Passover time, and it says, for Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. Purge out the old leaven that you may be a new lump. And there is time in our lives where we got to do that. And maybe you didn't have the best mom or dad in your life, but it's important for you to know that you can be successful. As I waxed on and thought about all the things that I see today where young people don't marry and they're not having children, it's destroying our culture. It's destroying our future. I thought about it in the context of, man, I love my wife. Sometime in your course of your life, you wake up and you really realize that you really do love her. I realized I got a good wife. There are a lot of women out there. But I have a good wife, and she is a good mother. And I don't want to see her go. Even I got $500,000 in insurance on her, I'd rather have her. I really would. I can say that honestly from my heart. I would rather have her than all the money that I could get from her dying. I want her. She'd be very hard to replace. Because there's not a lot of good women out there. There's not a lot of women who know how to be a mother, who know how to be a wife, who even want to be a wife. They're so insecure today. And to the women's credit, there's not a lot of good men out there. Man, if I died, I told her, you got to go to another city, set up in another state, because quite frankly, there's not a lot of good men here in New York. I don't want, if she's a pretty girl, she will have no problem replacing me in short order. As far as guys who would be interested in courting her. Met a man yesterday who found a woman who's a fairly nice woman apparently, but her husband abandoned her with 7 children. He is not married to her, but he's given her 2 more children. And they're not living in poverty. But it's a shame, because if you have a decent woman of decent character, there are men out there who will snatch you up. But it's hard to find another man. It's hard to find a good man. It really is. Who's not completely selfish and consumed and insecure, and has any principles, that know how to raise and want to raise kids, and patience. Committed to that, but man, afraid to marry. I don't know, afraid. Want to see people marry. I thought to myself as I thought about this, I said, it's really not that hard. My kids are pretty good kids, and I'm not bragging about myself. My wife's a pretty good wife. It's pretty easy being married. I look around and say, why aren't all these people staying married? It's pretty easy. It really isn't that hard when you have the right principles. When you stick to the right principles, you apply and adopt the right principles to your life, it really isn't that hard to stay married. It isn't that hard to raise good kids. You do have to make some sacrifices, though. You do have to give up some insecurities. You do got to look around and see who's doing it right. If you had a mother who you love her, but she really wasn't a good mother, and by the grace of God, you are what you are, and you still see a lot of your own mother in her, and you see the bad things in her, in yourself, and you say, man, I've got to purge this out. Every generation has that opportunity. You can be better. That's the beauty of Christianity, is we have a Redeemer, and we have a book, and this book can help you. This book can tell you what you need to be. When you don't have good examples in your life, this book, if you apply it rightly, this book can make you all that you need to be. But you got to be willing to do it, which means men and women, you got to be willing to swallow your pride. You need to be able to lay down your insecurities before God. And you know what? It takes a little bit of faith, because you got to say, God, it's not natural to me because I wasn't raised that way. But I see that this is the right way to do things. And by faith, I will obey you. I will do it your way. And if you're willing to do it, you can purge out the old principles, but you can't leave a vacuum. You have to put in the new principles. You have to be willing to look at everything in your life and ask yourself, why do I do the things I do? Why do I live the way that I live? Why do I make the choices I make? Why do I act or react in different situations the way I do? I know I'm not supposed to be like this. Ask. Seek and you shall find. But if you ask that in the light of God and prayerfully, the Holy Spirit will show you. And if you're tender and you're willing to change, God will show you what you need to do. You can change. You can break generational sin. You can give your children a good home. Life throws punches at you and nobody's promised tomorrow, but you can, with the much breath that God gives you, you can be better. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. With God, all things are possible. Josiah had a good mother, and as a result of that, he had a good reign. And yes, he made mistakes in life, and he made the mistake of going out to battle. That's why he died at 40, but he had to lead his people, but he ended up dying. And thus God would end up fulfilling the cup of wrath with a few kings that were left. He had Jehoahaz, he reigned at 23 years old, 2 Kings 23. His mother was Hamutal, which is kind of a strange name, means my father-in-law is protection.
Okay.
All right. But she becomes the mother of Jehoahaz and later on Zedekiah, because Jehoahaz is disposed. He did what was wicked in the sight of the Lord. And he reigned only 3 months, the shortest of them all, just about. And then he was replaced by Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim had a different mother. His name was Eliakim. They changed it to Jehoiakim. He became king. He reigned 11 years and did that which is evil, and he got replaced by Nebuchadnezzar. God fulfilled his prophecy in that time, and Nebuchadnezzar threw that guy out and put his half-brother in. See, Jehoiakim, Jehoahaz, and Zedekiah, they're all brothers from another mother. But that was the end of the line. That was the end of the line for the kings, and it all had to do with their mothers. Had a profound impact on the direction of a nation. It is still true today as it has always been true. Men may lead the nation. Men may have positions of leadership throughout all of society. But it is still true that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Mothers are extremely important. Too often unsung heroes. But your influence in your children's life will determine the future direction of all of society. Oh God, give us godly mothers. Give us godly fathers. Let's all bow our heads, close our eyes with no one looking around.